scrap NAFTA, Senator Obama, or fix it?
I would immediately call the President of Mexico, the President of Canada, to try to amend NAFTA, because I think that we can get labor agreements in that agreement right now. And it should reflect the basic principle that our trade agreements should not just be good for Wall Street, it should also be good for Main Street. And the problem that we've had is that we've had corporate lobbyists oftentimes involved in negotiating these trade agreements, but the AFL-CIO hasn't been involved. Ordinary working people have not been involved. And we've got to make sure that our agreements are good for everybody, because globalization right now is creating winners and losers. But the problem is it's the same winners and the same losers each and every time. And we've got to mix it up. And that does mean, by the way, that you've got to have a president in the White House who is not subject simply to the whims of corporate lobbyists. And that issue is going to be something that I think should be important throughout this campaign. Are we going to make certain that you have a voice in Washington, Senator, and not just those who are paying the big money in Washington have that opportunity to negotiate?
All right, as to continue with this in 30 seconds to that, but back to our original topic, Senator Obama, the flip side to fair trade, obviously. If buying American costs more, and in many cases it does, how do you convince a working family that's struggling to get by on a tight budget and in part makes ends meet using $10 T-shirts for their kids, that buying American is still best for them no matter what the price is?
Look, people don't want a cheaper T-shirt if they're losing a job in the process. They would rather have the job and pay a little bit more for a T-shirt, and I think that's something that all Americans could agree to. But this raises a larger point, which is globalization is here, and we should be trading around the world. We don't want to just be standing still while the rest of the world is out there taking the steps that it needs to in order to expand trade. The question is, on whose behalf is the president negotiating? Is he or she negotiating on behalf of the people in this stadium, or are you only negotiating on behalf of corporate profits? And that is an important issue, and it's an important distinction that we've got to make. One other thing that has to be mentioned: Congress has a responsibility, because we've got right now provisions in our tax code that reward companies that are moving jobs overseas instead of companies that are investing right here in the United States of America. And that is a reflection of the degree to which special interests have been shaping our trade policy. That's something that I'll end.
Senator Obama, thank you.
Well, there's no doubt that NAFTA needs to be amended. And I've already said that I would contact the President of Mexico and the Prime Minister of Canada to make sure that the labor and environmental agreements are actually enforceable in the same way that patent protections and other things that are important to corporate America are enforceable.
John is exactly right that you travel around South Carolina and you see the textile mills that John's father worked in, closed all over the region. And it is absolutely true that NAFTA was a mistake. I know that Hillary, on occasion, has said that this was, just last year, said this was a boon to the economy. I think it has been devastating because our trade agreements did not have labor standards and environmental standards that would assure that workers in the U.S. were getting a square deal. You tell an extraordinarily powerful story. I mean, you understand what's happened with respect to trade here, and I think it is powerful when you talk about it. But keep in mind, I first moved to Chicago to be a community organizer with churches who were trying to deal with the devastation of steel plants that had closed in that region. And so I spent 3.5 years working alongside folks who had lost their jobs. And I know what it's like for families to have put their life and their heart and soul into a company, building profits for shareholders, and then suddenly they have the rug pulled out from under them. Not only have they lost their job, they've lost their health care, they've lost their pension benefits. And it is absolutely critical for us to understand that NAFTA was an enormous problem. The permanent trade relations with China, without some of the enforcement mechanisms that were in there, that you voted for, was also a significant problem. And we've got to all move forward as Democrats to make sure that we've got trade deals that work for working people and not just for corporate profits.
All right.
Well, I think that it is inaccurate for Senator Clinton to say that she's always opposed NAFTA. In her campaign for Senate, she said that NAFTA, on balance, had been good for New York and good for America. I disagree with that. I think that it did not have the labor standards and environmental standards that were required in order to not just be good for Wall Street, but also be good for Main Street. And if you travel through Youngstown and you travel through communities in my home state of Illinois, you will see entire cities that have been devastated as a consequence of trade agreements that were not adequately structured to make sure that U.S. workers had a fair deal. Now, I think that Senator Clinton has shifted positions on this and believes that we should have strong environmental standards and labor standards, and I think that's a good thing. But, you know, when I first moved to Chicago in the early 80s, and I saw steel workers who had been laid off of their plants, black, white, and Hispanic, and I worked on the streets of Chicago to try to help them find jobs, I saw then that the net costs of many of these trade agreements, if they're not properly structured, can be devastating. And as President of the United States, I intend to make certain that every agreement that we sign has the labor standards, the environmental standards, and the safety standards that are going to protect not just workers, but also consumers. We can't have toys with lead paint in them that our children are playing with. We can't have medicines that are actually making people more sick instead of better because they're produced overseas. We have to stop providing tax breaks for companies that are shipping jobs overseas and give those tax breaks to companies that are investing here in the United States of America. And if we do those things, then I believe that we can actually get Ohio back on the path of growth and jobs and prosperity. If we don't, then we're going to continue to see the kind of deterioration that we've seen economically here in this state.
I didn't just start criticizing unfair trade deals like NAFTA because I started running for president. I do it because I see what happens to communities when factories close down and the jobs move overseas. I began my career on the south side of Chicago as a community organizer when we fought joblessness and poverty after the neighborhoods had been devastated when the local steel plants closed.
Canada and the CTV story had the American political world abuzz today.
I just think that candidates owe the American people the truth.
That story detailed how a senior member of the Obama campaign called the Canadian government within the last month to say that when Senator Obama talks about opting out of the free trade deal, the Canadian government shouldn't worry. The operative said it's just campaign rhetoric and don't take it seriously. A similar but lower level indirect communication was said to have come from the Clinton camp, something that it denies. That caught the attention of Republican frontrunner John McCain.
I don't think it's appropriate to go to Ohio and tell people one thing while your aide is calling the Canadian ambassador and telling him something else.
This morning, the Canadian Embassy issued this, a complete denial. At no time has any member of a presidential campaign called the Canadian ambassador or any official at the embassy to discuss NAFTA. And yet, just yesterday, one of the primary sources for this story, someone at a senior level in the Canadian Embassy in Washington, was giving CTV details of a phone call, even giving a timeline. He has since suggested that perhaps there was a miscommunication. The denial from the embassy was followed by a denial from the Obama campaign.
Senator, campaign officials called the U.S. ambassador to Canada and say, don't worry, it's just campaign rhetoric about NAFTA.
The Canadian government put out a statement indicating that this was just not true. So I don't know who the source is. It wasn't true.
Obama has made attacks on NAFTA a centerpiece of his campaign to win the Ohio primary next Tuesday. Massive job losses in Ohio are blamed on the trade deal. And any suggestion that Obama wouldn't carry out his threats could tip the balance in a very tight race with Hillary Clinton. Which is why it's important to the Obama campaign to have any stories about calls to foreign governments squelched, and why it's important for the Canadian government to distance itself from any appearance of interfering in the internal politics of the United States. And yet, amid all of the denials, sources at the highest level of the Canadian government who first confirmed that a call was made, late this afternoon reconfirmed that a call was made. Tom Clark, CTV News, Washington.
I want to thank all my fellow leaders and the trade ministers for joining us here today. I know we all have very busy schedules, so I'm going to keep my remarks brief. We're here today because the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a high priority for our nations and for the region. As President, strengthening American leadership in the Asia-Pacific has been one of my top foreign policy priorities, and central to that objective is working with some of our most important trading partners to to try to find ways in which we can facilitate increased growth for all of us, increased investment for all of us, improved jobs prospects for all of us. And what we are seeing is momentum building around a Trans-Pacific partnership that can spur greater economic growth, spur greater jobs growth, set high standards for trade and investment throughout the Asia Pacific. And I don't think I have to explain to the press why this region is so important. This is the fastest growing, most populous, most dynamic region in the world economically. During the past few weeks, our teams have made good progress in resolving several outstanding issues regarding a potential agreement. Today is an opportunity at the political level for us to break some remaining logjams. To ensure that TPP is a success, we also have to make sure that all of our people back home understand the benefits for them. That it means more trade, more good jobs, and higher incomes for people throughout the region, including the United States. And that's a case that I'll continue to make to Congress and the American people, and I know that the leaders here are committed to making that case as well. This has the potential for being a historic achievement. It's now up to all of us to see if we can finalize a deal that is both ambitious and comprehensive. The stronger the agreement, the greater the benefits to our people. So to all my fellow leaders, I want to thank you, not just for your participation here today, but more importantly, for the mandate that you have given to your negotiating teams to engage in some very serious work that promises to deliver greater prosperity, trade, and commerce between our nations and the future. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
On whose behalf is the president negotiating? Is he or she negotiating on behalf of the people in this stadium? Or are you only negotiating on behalf of corporate profits? And that is an important issue, and it's an important distinction that we've got to make.